Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 8 of the Business as Usual podcast. I'm Jack Goodrich. My co-host is Michael Sawyer. We've had a bit of a hiatus over the Christmas break due to not being at work and so on, and students preparing hopefully doing their revision, especially if they're in year 11 or year 13. They've got exams coming up in the summer. This was the only business studies educational podcast, but I've noticed over the last few weeks that that's no longer the case. There's a new startup that started doing some business studies news stories, little videos every week. Wonder where they got that idea.
Oh, obviously an inferior product. It's all right, Jack. I've got the lawyers on the case.
Yeah, don't worry. We're not scared of a little bit of competition, are we? So we're gonna first of all shout out to the Guardian for this one, because we read an article this week about, it was actually posted this morning, about Christmas retail winners and losers. We've just had the big Christmas break, and it's worth having a look at. Christmas is notoriously a good time for business, but actually, when you look at it in a little bit more detail, some businesses have done really well. Some businesses haven't done that well at all. So we're going to sort of split this into two little bits. We're going to do some examples of some Christmas winners and some Christmas losers. Mike, do you want to start us off with a Christmas winner?
Yeah, so I mean, the biggest, it's no surprise that some of the biggest winners have been food and drink providers. So we've got Greggs that have been all over the news for having a bumper Christmas, selling their vegan products, and they've announced out of the blue that they're going to do a bit of profit sharing. So they're going to use £7 million of their profits that they've racked up to distribute on average £300 to each staff member, which will no doubt motivate all their workforce into the new year.
Yeah, they've got 25,000 staff, and how much of that's seasonal though? How much of that's Christmas, and how much of that's just Greggs taking advantage of really sort of growing trends towards healthy eating? Because they've launched a vegan sausage roll, and actually this week, is it this week or this month, they've started rolling out. I think they pretty much want a vegan alternative to every product on their menu. So how much of this is like seasonal, and how much of it's just trend?
I would say this is all trend. We were looking at this when we was doing their Boston Matrix in class a couple of months ago. We were looking at Greggs. They were the biggest growth provider of food and drink on the high street for snacks, etc. And we decided it was because they were taking advantage of the overwhelming consumer trend for being healthier and for catering to vegan tastes.
Yeah, and they're all doing it now.
They're all doing it. So I would say, I mean, they might get a slight bump. They do the special coffees, etc., over Christmas, and the hot chocolates.
Generally speaking, they do like a pigs and blankets baguette thing as well. Now, I'm a big fan of Greggs in the way that I'm a big fan of anything that comes out of Newcastle, basically. And Greggs is a Geordie firm, so I'm a big fan of Greggs. I'm also not so much a big fan of the fact that there's one literally like 3 steps away from my gym's front door. So when you roll out of the gym, it's sort of 7:45 in the morning, and there's a Greggs there with its lights on, nice and warm, with its sausage rolls, and it's not in the best place for me, but I love a bit of Greggs. Another winner, which I think is quite expected, is Next. Next's always famously done well at Christmas, and one of the big reasons for this is they have this massive sale on Boxing Day. It is pretty much the only time I buy work clothes, is when the next sale rocks up. We went into Newcastle on, I was home for Christmas. We went into Newcastle on Boxing Day, queued up for about an hour to buy 3 pairs of work trousers, buying all the stuff that was in season last season. So it's all out of fashion now, but it doesn't seem to stop me. They reckon that they had 5.2% sales growth in the last 2 months. So that would obviously include that part well ahead of their forecasts. And they reckon that they've bumped up their sort of forecasted profit to 727 million as well. So they reckon they've sort of overstated their forecasts by 3 or 4 million. So another example of a retailer that's done pretty well, and they're not really, they're in short supply, aren't they? Those retailers that have done particularly well in the Christmas break.
Yeah, especially in the clothing industry. I mean, it's tough competition, isn't it? You've had Marks and Spencer's really trying to push their men's and women's clothing. So the fact that Next have come out as the victors really in the battle has been impressive. I was worried about their future.
Before we go on, yeah, no, I agree, because I mean, their website's dreadful, by the way. Like in an era where apps and accessibility is so important, the Next website is atrocious.
That sounds like a 20-mark question in the future. That one does.
Do you reckon? I just don't like their website at all. Maybe it's just the sales stuff. I tend not to really buy clothes full price. But anyway, before we go on to the losers, but less about my fashion habits and more about business news maybe. Before we go on to the losers of the Christmas break, it's worth also, you mentioned sort of food earlier. Two big winners, Tesco and Aldi, have both had really good Christmases.
Yes, Tesco have had a slight increase in their sales, but it's been considered a big victory because they were expecting a downtrend. So it's an unexpected slight increase, with Sainsbury's and Morrison's falling by the wayside. Whereas Aldi, who were expected to make big gains, had another 8% increase in their sales. But they did warn that their profits have taken a bit of a hammering, to quote their CEO. But that was expected with their vastly reduced prices to undercut their rivals. So they picked this Christmas as a bit of a battle.
Market share target, really, isn't it? They were trying to sort of gain sales rather than gain profits, and trying to sort of increase their growing market share in the groceries market. It is a bit of a success for Tesco though, because Tesco has been criticised quite a lot over the last several years for being middle market and losing consumers to the low price businesses like Aldi and Lidl. So I think for them to be staying still is somewhat of a victory for them, isn't it? But Aldi definitely will be really happy.
Yeah, I mean, linking back to objectives, this is almost, the strange one of having a huge company like Tesco having survival almost as one of their objectives.
Should we have a look at some losers then as well? So you mentioned Marks and Spencer's. What exactly was it that went wrong?
So Marks and Spencer's have been doing a lot of discounting. I've got one of the biggest ones in the country just down the road from me, and I am just as uncool as you, Jack, possibly more, because I wait for the M&S sales to come up, and they've been doing a sale every single month, I think, since around September, on their menswear. So they thought this big promotional push would see them improve and see their shares increase, because they're worried about lack of investment. But their shares have fallen another 10% over the period, as they saw their sales figures drop 1.7% on last year. So they are
the common criticism of Marks and Spencer's, and this is not to make any comment towards you, but the common criticism is that their clothes are too old. And there's a few little bits that have come out from some of the statements from Marks and Spencer's over the last week, that maybe they've started to try and put that balance a little bit in the wrong direction. So they've tried to overcompensate for that, but they've said that over the Christmas period, they stocked loads of skinny jeans, obviously hoping to attract a younger audience, and they've just been left with loads of skinny jeans that they haven't been able to sell. So they're trying to go younger, clearly not quite that successfully just yet.
Yeah, apparently skinny jeans are out now. No one told me.
Really? That's not the case in my sixth form. To be fair, no one wears jeans in sixth form. They just wear. We don't have a uniform. Do you have a uniform at yours?
They call it smart casual.
Yeah, they call it smart casual here. I'm not sure
more how casual than smart.
More casual than smart. Like everyone wears jogging bottoms, but really, really expensive trainers. Like 20.
They've got the Balenciagas out.
400 pound. We'll come back to that in a minute. Anyway, there's some other brands in the clothing market that have struggled, and this is not necessarily a huge surprise, because the retail, we've talked all year about the high street struggling. Well, Superdry, a business that seemed like it was in its ascension in the last decade, has really started to slow down. They've cut prices massively. They've actually released a statement this week saying they're not expecting to make a profit this year, and that has resulted in 22% fall in their share price. So Superdry really potentially struggling, and they might be under some real trouble. It says sales have slumped by nearly 16% up to January, in the 10 weeks up to January, so the back end of 2019. And they also had a few issues with not having enough of their best-selling lines, and really struggled with the discounting that every other business on the high street was doing.
Yeah, I mean, Superdry are a really interesting one. I mean, they were, not to give too much away about our ages, they were the supreme and the champion, etc., of our era, weren't they? And they were selling all their products for £100 and north of that.
They probably
and now,
not, maybe not to the same extent as like the likes of Supreme, because Supreme is like a little bit different because they do it on limited release, don't they? But they were
true.
definitely much, they were definitely highly differentiated, definitely sort of maybe not quite premium price. It wasn't like, Ted Baker, Ralph Lauren kind of prices, but they were quite expensive. You'd look at like 30 quid for a t-shirt and, as you say, £100 for a coat, 60 quid for a hoodie. So it wasn't cheap stuff, but it was really, really popular, really, really, really fashionable at the time. And it's kind of dropped off, hasn't it? What's replaced it then?
Well, they've tried to do battle with Nike, in my opinion, and Adidas. So they've tried to knock out the jackets for £50, etc., that they were selling for 100, and they've tried to knock out t-shirts for £15. So they've tried to go super mass market, and it's possibly turned off the brand appeal of being slightly exclusive, I suppose. But you are right; they're nowhere near as exclusive as Champion and Supreme, etc. I think Adidas has had a bit of a resurgence, haven't they?
I think those sportswear brands have, and I think a lot of it comes down to this. There's a big sort of sneaker culture at the moment. At what point is a bunch of 30-year-olds talking about teenage trends, by the way, to a bunch of teenagers listening to this podcast?
Shaking their heads at us.
They're just like, they have no idea. I'm probably going to get pulled up on this. But like, you mentioned Supreme, you mentioned Balenciaga, like that's what they're interested in. And sort of Superdry just it's just not grown with the audience, if that makes sense. The audience of Superdry 10 years ago who were 18 are now our age, and the new 18-year-olds don't want that kind of stuff. It's still reasonably popular, but not in the same way it was when I was in sixth form, when we were at university, for example. Those sort of really, really expensive trainers and the bright colors of the trainers and the sort of the limited edition Nike drops and Jordan brand and stuff like that. That kind of culture is becoming much more popular, and Superdry is obviously really struggling. It's
all very celebrity. It's all very celebrity based now, isn't it? I mean, if you're looking at like the Yeezys, but because Kanye's wearing them, and Balenciagas are worn by all these Instagram people. Do you know what I mean?
Influencers.
Yeah, influencers. That's the one. Influencers. Yeah.
You sound proper old, this podcast.
It's
we
tough.
sound really old.
Anyway, we are old. We're accepting it.
Yeah. I'm 31 next month. Anyway, we've got 3 little stories for students to have a read up as well in the over the next week or so. We're going to put a little bit we'll put these articles in the description so you can have a look and have a look at these stories as well as the stuff that we've talked about. So, Mike, you've got 2. You've got one about Boeing.
Yeah, first one is Boeing. The airplane manufacturer, etc., caught up in political conflict between Iran and the US. So that should be quite an interesting one to look at.
There's a story this week about IKEA having to pay out, I think it was £35 million to a family in America due to one of their faulty products causing a 2-year-old child to die. And when you look back at it, you'll see how many of those stories there actually are.
And then finally, we've got energy providers under pressure from regulators over price increases in bills.
Have a look at those stories. I hope if you've got any questions about any of the things that we've talked about, or if you've got any ideas for what you'd like us to cover in the future, please give us a shout. You can follow us on YouTube, subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on Twitter. Our Twitter handles are on the YouTube description and what have you. Subscribe on Spotify, and we will see you next Friday for episode 9.